Hey there curious minds, today we are going to explore things in our body that you've never felt yet. You might think you've had this body your whole life so you know everything about it. Well, you couldn't be more wrong. Now before we get started, these things are best felt on a skinny subject. So if you have a little bit of more subcutaneous fat on you, then I suggest with another person's consent that you select a skinny subject and try it on them. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to feel some of these things. Now, let's get those fingers ready for some hands-on exploration. Starting from the top, we have the thyroid notch. That's what you call the Adam's apple, right here. And then when you move your finger down, you feel the thyroid cartilage and then a small soft area. That small bump below that, it's the cricoid cartilage. And then when you move your finger below from the cricoid cartilage and move downwards, right here you feel the suprasternal notch. And above and behind that, you feel the trachea, and you can actually feel the tracheal rings if you feel it carefully. It might be a bit uncomfortable. You might feel some discomfort. And another thing that we do when we palpate, when we do an examination, is when you keep your fingers like this, the first and the third finger like this, and then you can run your finger to the sides of the trachea. This is how we measure if the trachea is deviated or not. Normally, it's very slightly deviated to the right. So if there's a significant deviation, it indicates something like tension pneumothorax when the trachea has shifted to the side. There are other conditions also, which is beyond the scope of this video, but I will put them on the screen right here. Moving on to the back of the neck, when you run your finger along the midline of the neck, you won't be able to feel any vertebrae. But once you run your finger down, at one point, you'll feel a small bump. That is what you call the vertebra prominence. That's your C7 vertebra. Now, this is actually a misnomer because the C7 vertebra is not the most prominent spinous process in your vertebral column, but it's the first one you feel when you move down because it's significantly more prominent than the rest of the cervical vertebrae. And also it's the point where the nuchal ligament ends. So the rest of your cervical vertebrae are attached to the nuchal ligament. So it's like this ligament that runs from the C7 and attaches to all the spinous processes of the vertebrae above it and then attaches to the back of the skull. The reason why you don't feel the vertebrae above the C7 is because the nuchal ligament is obstructing it. So when you flex your neck backwards and relax it, maybe you'll be able to feel the spinous processes of your cervical vertebrae. Otherwise, when you flex your neck, the nuchal ligament is stretched. So what you feel is the nuchal ligament instead of your cervical vertebral spines. Moving on to the upper limbs. So starting with the clavicle, the entire outer border of the clavicle can be palpated throughout its length. This is something you already knew, but something you probably didn't know is that when you carefully palpate, you might actually feel the supraclavicular nerves passing over the clavicle, and you will be able to roll the nerve on the clavicle if you find it. I think I found one right here. You might feel some discomfort if you press too hard on it. And then you have the coracoid process. You might think it's only palpable on a muscular subject, but here if you protract your shoulders especially, you'll be able to prominently feel your coracoid process than when you retract it. When you protract your shoulder, the coracoid process also comes front a bit. You'll be able to feel it under your pectoralis muscle. And then another structure that you probably think is completely covered by muscles, the head of the humerus. Well, you think you might be able to feel it in somebody who has zero muscle. Well, you're wrong. Because in everybody, when you abduct your shoulder, the axilla doesn't have any muscle covering the shoulder. So when you completely abduct it 180 degrees, you can actually feel the head of the humerus. And when you do this, you can feel the head of the humerus rotating. Isn't that cool? Did you know that was possible? Probably not. If you are mind blown by these things just as I am, then consider subscribing to this channel because there's going to be more videos like this one. Now, let's move on to the lower limbs. Your ischial tuberosity. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate these things because that's kind of awkward. But your ischial tuberosity, you think it's covered by the gluteus muscle. That's probably the biggest muscle in our body. You think you won't be able to palpate it, but we usually learn anatomy in the anatomical position, right? But when you sit down, the gluteus muscle actually slides to the side, exposing the ischial tuberosity. So when you're sitting down, you're actually sitting down on your ischial tuberosity itself. So that is not covered by your gluteus muscle. It's usually covered by the gluteal fat pad and the subcutaneous fat. So that's what gives the support to your buttocks when you sit down. And that's why you don't feel too much of a hard bony feeling. But if you're really skinny, you might feel that. People who have felt this awkward feeling when you sit down on a hard surface, and you might think that if only you had a bigger gluteus muscle, that it wouldn't happen. But actually that wouldn't help at all, because the gluteus muscle slides to the side when you sit down. Fun fact, if you sit down and put your weight on the ischial tuberosity for a prolonged period of time, you can develop something called ischio-gluteal bursitis. If you don't already know, bursae are these water-filled bags that kind of reduce the friction between sliding parts of our body. So when this gluteal muscle slides over these bony parts, there's a water-filled bag that rolls to reduce the friction, to allow the tissues to glide between each other. When you put too much pressure on this for too long, those water bags can get inflamed. That's what you call the ischio-gluteal bursitis, when it happens in the butt. Actually, I almost got this one time when I was driving from LA to Las Vegas. And that was about a 6-hour drive without any stops in the barren desert. There was no place to get down, so we just kept driving. And it was almost 6 hours sitting in this very awkward cushioned car that we rented from LA. Yeah, so that was not a pleasant experience. So make sure to give your butt some rest. So moving on to the knee. Let me bring down the camera a bit for this one. Okay. I got myself a little stool so I can demonstrate. Yeah. When you extend your knee passively, that means you're not like lifting it by force, but you are putting your knee, foot on a stool and extending your leg passively. You can actually feel the patella. You can feel it and move it side to side, because it's no longer being anchored by the tendons and the muscles. When you fully relax your quadricep muscle, you can actually move your patella side to side. I think I've covered a lot of the surface anatomy today, but I left a few quite obvious bony landmarks out of it. You probably already know these things, but there's something probably even more interesting that you can touch and feel and discover on your body. That is your pulse. So stay tuned for that video. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification button, as we are going to explore all of the places in our body that we can feel our pulse.